Hello everyone. Today we're going to continue with our Maya intro tutorials. We are going to see how to import an object, how to export an object, how to create a material, and how to render using Arnold. We're going to make a quick render. We're going to add some lights and some Arnold materials to our object. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to import our object. To that, you go to File, Import, and you go where you have your object saved. In this case, I have it right here on my desktop. Here on the desktop. And we select it and click Import. There we have it. To export an object is very similar. You just go to File, you select whatever you want to export. You go to File, and you click Export Selection, and you can click the options here in the square. If you hit Export All, you're just gonna export everything that you have in your scene. In this case, this bookshelf is the only thing that we have. But if we have multiple things and we want to export one thing, we just click Export Selection. We select the file type that we want to export as. They're probably going to be using OBJ or FBX. OBJ is the simpler one. Just going to export our geometry. We hit Export Selection. We select where we want to export it, give it a name, and that's it. OBJs are very useful. You can import them to multiple software. You don't need to only use Maya. So if you're going to be creating game assets or any other type of assets for animations, and you need to use a different software, you're probably going to be using OBJs to export those and import them into the other software. So next up, we're going to create a material for this. We already have some textures for this object that were created in a different software, but you can always get textures on the internet, or you might download an object that comes with its own textures. To create that material, we are going to go to the Hypershade. So here in the Hypershade, you will see that you have materials, textures, utilities, rendering, lights. Like anything that you put in your scene is going to go somewhere in here. Very similar to our outliner, but this is a different way to access it. In this case, we are going to be focusing on materials. You can see that our object came with an assigned material. We're going to create a new one, and since we're going to be rendering with Arnold, we are going to use Arnold materials. So go here to Arnold, Shader, and let's create an AI standard surface, which is the simpler material and shader that you're probably going to be using if you're rendering with Arnold. You'll see that when we created it, we got a new material, and we also got this node graph here. And we can see other materials here just by clicking here, this little arrow. But we're going to be focusing on the one that we just created. Let's different name. You can see that we have all the different options for our material here. Same thing that we have in our attribute editor. We can see it in our Hypershade too. Also, this is the way you're gonna see it by default. And since this is an Arnold material, we can change how we see the preview of the material, either Maya or Arnold. We're gonna select Arnold. It's a bit slower because it has to render, but this way we are going to see how it's actually gonna look when we render it. So first thing, we are not gonna change the color of the material. We're going to put a texture for the color. So we have to click on this check mark, select file. You can see that we are creating new nodes. And on our new node, we are going to put our file, our image file. Again, I already had all these textures. If you are downloading an object, you are probably going to get a list of textures that you can put. For our color, we're going to use the base color here. Open it. You'll see how it changes. Now, our material is using a texture for the color. To apply it, we can either mouse click, middle mouse click, and drag it to our object. Or we can select our objects that we want to apply the material, hold right click on the material and assign to selection. Or we can also hold right click on the objects, assign existing material, and select it. But you can see that it's still looking great. That's because we are not seeing textures. To be able to see textures in your viewport, you have to click here in the texture shortcut. Or you can also press 6. You can press 5 to hide the textures. Very useful when you're modeling something and you don't want the textures to show up. Okay, go back to our material, click it. Here in specular, you can change the roughness, make it shinier or rougher. You can also change the color of the specular. In a lot of cases, you will get a roughness map too. We're not going to use one right now. But again, if you have a map, it's the same way as the color. You just go to the checker mark, select file, and you put your image section. Same thing with the bump, your normal map. For the normal, that's a bit more complicated in Arnold materials. One way to do it is to go to Arnold here. Remember to select Arnold, look for normal, AI normal map. You're going to create a new node when you click it. You also are going to go and click AI image. Here, let's set it to raw instead of sRGB. Look for our normal map. Connect the out color into input and our out value into normal camera. You can notice that we're still not seeing that here. That's because it's not rendering with Arnold. So we need to actually go ahead and render this to be able to see the normal map. So first, before we render, we can actually go ahead and tell the viewport to render with Arnold. I'm gonna get this little window here. Click on crop region. Since it takes longer, it's you can always select a smaller region and the render is going to be a bit faster. We hit play and it should start rendering. You can see that everything's back. That's because we haven't set lights in our scenes. So let's create a couple lights for continuing. We can go to create lights and let's make a directional light. Instantly we can see that some light appeared. It's smaller, so it. Now you can see the difference. You can actually go ahead and duplicate this one. Have a different light source. And we can also change the intensity here in the attribute editor. Make it a bit brighter. Okay, so now let's go ahead and actually make a render of this. First of all, let's set up our render settings. Our render is using Arnold renderer. That should be like that by default. Let's select preset 1080. Close this. Let's go ahead and go to Arnold. Open Arnold render view. You get this window here. Press play. There we go. This is using our camera, our perspective camera, to render. You can change that. You can create a new camera and use that as a render, so you don't have to be moving your perspective camera in the viewport. And once our render is done, we can go ahead and save that image. File, save image, and select where you want to save it. And there we go.